This is a Middle-earth philosopher, and for this part of the House of Hador, I'm taking on Rian. Now, Rian is a difficult character to pin down among the House of Hador because, like her husband, so very little is said about her, and that her impact personally onto the story of the family is extremely limited, save that she's the mother of Tuor. And to be honest, I almost didn't do a video on her for that very reason. Again, as I said in the previous video on Huor, it's not the first time that Tolkien wrote up a character whose only major purpose was the lineage. Now, brief factoid overview is that she was of the royal house of Beor from the Thornian, thus making her a cousin of Beren and Morwen, and more or less a princess. When the Dagor-Bragollach War had started, she was only a child when the realm fell to Morgoth. So this also makes her a refugee during the time of the guerrilla fighting. Though, given that she was a young girl at the time, I doubt she saw any actual combat. And, as I said before, when things got really bad, the remaining women and children reluctantly left to go flee to Dor-lómin, while the men remained and died in Dor-lómin, mostly. With the refugees, Rian came into the free lands of Dor-lómin eventually and came to live there, now safe, supposedly, from the forces of Morgoth, thanks to the Mordor elves of Hithlum. Now later on, she ends up marrying Huor when she's about 23 years old, brother of Hurin. And for about 2 months, she had a happy life with them and even got pregnant. But 2 months later, he was cut off the war and never returned, with Rian being pregnant and knowing very little of what happened other than that they lost and that it was from the betrayal of the Easterlings. Speaking of which, when the Easterling colonizers did come, she fled into the woods and was basically rescued by the great elves of Mithrim. She gave birth to her son, Tuor, left him in charge of the elves, and then went off to the battlefield of the Arneath and Noriad, finding the Hill of the Slain of Anthagleith. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And it was there that Rian pretty much saw the remains and just laid there and died, apparently. Now, already from this, we get a picture of someone who wasn't a scene stealer, as it were. Despite also being a refugee and suffering through war and migration like her cousin Morwen, she turns out nothing like her. In fact, it says that she pretty much, in modern terminologies, is a pacifist. She saw no joy or anything admirable in any kind of violence whatsoever, and preferred the peace of nature of Middle-earth, and making and singing songs to that of hunting, war, and the typical things that people did back then, I guess. And I think there's a lot of symbolism in these things, that essentially the beauty and peace of the First Age withering away before the death and destruction wrought by the wars, ultimately symbolized within her, given the fact that she got married at 20 and then died when she was 23 years old. Didn't even know her husband for a year, if we're just going by when they were married. Who knows how long the courtship was. From this little information, though, I was able to see something of a pattern. And again, this is speculation, so please bear with me. I think Rian was just as scarred by the fall of her country like her cousins, but this manifested differently. This is not to say that she loved war prior to the Dagor-Bragollach, but she certainly came to hate it afterwards, after losing her family and home, and then suffering through the trek of Dor-lómin, after suffering having to eat God knows what just to survive while being hunted down. So to me, it would make sense that she would turn towards anything opposite of that. And speaking of which, and I'm just speculating here, I think she would have seen the warrior tradition of Dor-lómin, especially in Hurin himself, as a massive turnoff. Hence what I say about her and Huor in my video on Huor. It says something about Huor's character that Rian was so devoted to him to even seek him out when he was most likely presumed dead. And I think it can be inferred that while being similar to his brother in many ways, Huor was also more of a gentler and less aggressive person than Hurin, as much as anyone from the House of Hador can go. And I think that was what most likely drew Rian to him, because again, as I said in the previous video, why the hell would a pacifist be drawn to marry a warrior? Just saying. Rian somehow, somewhere, had learned about why the Allies had lost the Battle of Number Tiers and how that was because of the Easterlings, and that apparently she told this to her infant son, who, for whatever reason, somehow was able to remember all this. To me, though, this implies perhaps a deep anger and resentment, at the very least, towards the one responsible for her husband's death and taking away the bliss that was her life at that point in time. Moreover, there's also the question of why she died the way she did. I mean, think about it. There were plenty of other widows that had also lost their husbands, brothers, cousins, and other family members during the wars, after all. Yet none of them, as far as we can tell anyway, died or unalived themselves, other than when we get to the House of Hador, of course. This is where the legacy of Rian's early life comes into play for her future. She already hated violence and fled from it. For a time, it seemed like she was safe from it and was prospering well enough in Norloman, the tragedies of Lordoftherings being far away in both distance and now memory. It's a much lighter version of what happened with Nienor after her encounter with Glaurung, but also still serious. Yet, that particular war, the Battle of Number Tiers, brought all the tragedy back to her, repeating the horrors and sufferings that she had endured as a child. And again, this is speculation, but I think she couldn't bear it anymore. I'm talking major PTSD, of course. With the specter, or loss, ever pursuing her, never allowing Rian to have any peace whatsoever before it tried to take it away from her. While Rian's one light left in the world was her son, in whom she believed that was going to be the salvation of Beleriand, it wasn't going to be enough to heal the wounds from her past that she was now actively bleeding out with, metaphorically speaking. And when I read about her death on the Mound of the Dead, I always picture her somehow seeing her husband's body or somehow recognizing it somehow, and that was when and where she just literally gave up life and just died, basically. So Rian is a tragic character in that she is one of those characters like Laith who, unfortunately and quite frankly, was simply too weak to make it in Beleriand during its wars. And I'm not saying this to punch down on her at all. It's just that was her personality. Rian is a person who would have thrived in Valinor or the first half of the Second Age in Numenor, when there were times were prosperous and where there was no threat of war or having what you love being ripped from you. But unfortunately, that was not her situation, and things happened the way that they did. If you have any thoughts on that, let me know below. This is Mother Philosopher. Have a good day.